Hello, everyone. We are live and welcome to today's interview, How to Utilize Marketing Tactics to Upgrade Your Career. I'm Jen Bunk. I am a career coach for tech managers and also founder of the People Stack. My guest for today, the person I'm interviewing is Wes Kao. She is a marketing strategy expert advisor and consultant, and she is also former executive director of Seth Godin's altMBA. Welcome, Wes. Great to talk with you today.
Hey, great to be here.
Awesome. So I'm really excited about this conversation because it's putting together two of my favorite topics, marketing and career upgrading. So let's put the two together and talk about how we can apply marketing to our careers. So first, what I want to talk about, let's address the elephant in the room, or maybe what might be the elephant in the room for some people. Why is marketing not a dirty word? I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Definitely. As someone who cares about my craft and cares about a great product, I used to be skeptical of marketing too. And I used to think that, the best products sell themselves. And if you have to do any marketing, it must mean that your product isn't very good. And that applies to people too. I used to believe that, okay, if you put your head down, keep working, the merit of what you do is going to rise to the top. And over the years, I've just seen that isn't true. There's plenty of really good people who get passed up for promotions, who get passed up for interesting, cool projects. And there's plenty of great ideas that don't see the light of day because of a bunch of factors that are floating around that if you're not aware of the game that's being played around you, you might not be thinking of and factoring in. So I think for me, marketing is a tool and a way to bring out the best ideas and to make sure that great people get the recognition that they deserve. And that, if you're working really hard, that's great, keep doing that. But spend a little bit of time also thinking about how to present your ideas, how to tell your story, how to create a sense of urgency around your ideas, around your project, around you yourself. If you're, let's say, interviewing for a job or, up for promotion, how do you set yourself up for success in these areas? Because ultimately, if you're great at presenting your ideas, it's going to positively impact the good ideas that rise to the top. And that benefits really everyone.
Yeah. Very, very well said. And I cannot agree with you more. And what you said about knowing people who have been, working hard but haven't gotten a promotion. This is the kind of thing that I encounter a lot with my clients, but it's also something that's very near and dear to my heart because I've sort of gone through that myself in my own career in terms of, hey, I'm working my butt off here, but yet I'm not getting recognized. Like, what am I missing? And it was the self-promotion piece of it. It was the marketing piece of it that I was missing. And so, yeah, and I love that take on it as well, that like, it's not just, yes, it is about putting our own oxygen mask on first and making sure that we're getting the recognition we deserve, but that it benefits others as well in the process. Not only shows others that, hey, marketing isn't such a bad thing, or self-promotion isn't a bad thing, that it can help us all rise together. So just wanted to air out that to start with, because I know that there's lots of folks who either have weird feelings, different feelings, maybe negative feelings about marketing. So just wanted to get your take on that. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and actually, I just thought of something else, which is that, I feel like all of us have examples of, that one person who isn't even that great, and yet they're getting awards, or they're getting a bunch of kudos, or they're getting press. They're getting invited to speak at conferences all the time, and you're just asking yourself, okay, how? Like, what is going on that's causing that? And it can be really frustrating to see that when you can think of a bunch of other people who might feel like they're more deserving to be up on that stage talking about this topic in your industry. And I think it's easy to get frustrated and resentful of that, and to just say like, no, like, I don't want to do any marketing for myself because of this person,
right.
The kind of person that does self-promotion. The world just doesn't understand our industry and our craft, and screw it. So it's really easy to have a knee-jerk reaction to just say, Because I see some people who are unfairly benefiting from marketing themselves and from being good at self-promotion, to just put it completely, aside as the enemy and just say, like, I don't want to do any of this. And I think that's a mistake.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to recognize that we're not saying like, you think marketing is bad? Like, where did that come from? Like, yeah, absolutely. We know where it comes from, but it's sort of acknowledging that just because some people are using their marketing powers for evil, doesn't mean that there aren't people who are using marketing powers for good, to not only lift themselves up, but other people in the process. And so we've been talking up until this point a little bit generally, like, maybe you're on the job market, maybe you're up for a promotion. And the last time we talked when you were on my podcast, on the People Stack podcast. So just as a heads up, if anybody wants to check out another conversation that I had with Wes, just check out my interview with her on the People Stack podcast. But one of the things that we talked about were high stakes career related conversations. And I think this is a great concept and is also going to kind of flow really nicely into the bulk of what I want to talk about today, is essentially strategies and tactics, how we can use these marketing strategies and tactics in our careers. But I think it's important to recognize when might we get the most bang for the buck? When might it be the most helpful? And I think it's in these high stakes career related conversations, as you phrased them, that's going to be the when. So talk to us a little bit about what you mean by these kinds of conversations. Can you give us some examples?
Mm-hmm. We have conversations all day, every day with a bunch of different people, but I define high stakes conversations as ones where there is a high upside or a potentially really big downside to something if it doesn't work out. Excuse me. So one example is if you're interviewing for a job, right? Huge upside, get to work at a great company that you're excited about. And negotiating for comp, that's another one. There's great upside there, obviously with monetary compensation, but there's a downside too, which is, if you're phrasing it in the wrong way or, not presenting your best foot forward or not framing it in a way where it feels beneficial for the company, there could be retaliation. There could be, a weird taste in everyone's mouth left from that. So, talking to your boss or your coworker, a coworker you work closely with, about something that they're doing that bothers you, or feedback, negative feedback. I mean, all of these are high stakes situations where you're kind of a little bit anxious to go into that conversation. And, if you feel yourself, having that mental dialogue of, okay, I say this, but what if they say that? Well, then I should say this. Like, that's a sign that there's some latent anxiety there with just needing this conversation to go well, and maybe feeling like there's some uncertainty about how it's going to turn out and just really not wanting it to blow up. So I would say those are all examples of high stakes conversations, and I think we go through them at work all the time.
Yeah, that it could be the big stuff. I think the examples that I use all the time certainly are job interviews, promotion conversations, or asking for a raise kinds of conversations. But you bring up a really good point that these kinds of conversations happen. It doesn't always have to be that big. The stakes always don't have to be that high. Maybe the highest they could possibly be could be, for example, at a job interview, where it's not just a job that's on the line, but it's also compensation and a number of other things as well. Especially if you're really hating your current job or you're out of the job, like really, really high stakes, like that could be like a 10. But then there's lots of other conversations that we have throughout the day that may be more like a 4 or a 5, that like negative feedback is a great example, where you feel like, okay, there's something at stake here. And if this conversation goes wrong or badly, something bad is going to happen to me or my team or others around me. So that's a great way of framing it and thinking about it. And then this is often where we feel like we need some help. We need a little bit of the best thing for me anyway. One of the really nice things to quell that anxiety is to have a strategy, to have a system, to have even a script if you need, like, what words am I going to use? Exactly how am I going to frame this? So that leads us to the bulk of what I want to talk about today, which is essentially how we utilize certain marketing tactics to help us upgrade our careers. And so a couple of the marketing tactics that we had talked about the last time we talked were FOMO, fear of missing out, and social proof. And so let's just start the conversation with either or both of those marketing tactics. So how would you like to start? Maybe we start with explaining like what the marketing tactic is in general, and then explain, how we can apply it in our career conversations.
Sure. Yeah, a really good one to start with, I think, is thinking about why whatever you're about to say matters to the other person. I think that's the best, just general foundation. If you were to remember one thing, let it be that. Yeah. And then all these other tactics really layer on and, pour more fuel on the fire. But the thing that really starts the fire and lays a great foundation for the conversation and planning out your strategy is thinking about, why does this matter and benefit the other person? And I think so many times we think we're doing that, but then we fall into describing, what we want to do and why we like doing a certain type of project, or why we're interested in a certain company. Let's say when you're job interviewing, and all those things are great. It's great for the interviewer to know that you are excited about their company and why this fits into your 5-year career plan, but they don't really care that much about your 5-year career plan. Like they care about, making more money, saving money, having more productive teams, right? Growing. There's all kinds of organizational concerns that hiring manager is thinking about at a high level. And then on a more personal, individual level, that hiring manager, if we dig into their psyche a little bit and their worldview, they're probably thinking about all the stuff that they have to do, all the stuff on their plate, and every manager knows there's always more stuff that gets added, but rarely anything that gets taken off. So when they're hiring, it's this beautiful chance where it's like, awesome, can this person add more value on our team, take some stuff off my plate, open up creativity for people because the work is getting spread out a little bit. And so they're thinking of all these things that that are not related to, you and what you want and what you like, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So I think just putting ourselves in the position of whoever we're talking to, whether it's an interviewer, whether it's your existing boss, and really thinking and empathizing with their situation and what they care about. That's a great starting place, because then we work backwards and we say, okay, if this person cares about X, how do we reverse engineer this so that whatever we say Y, ABC, feeds into that and can really support that.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I think that that is something that a lot of people often forget about. That not actually forget about, that they remember it. But what I meant to say was that they like you said, they think they're doing it, but they're not really doing it. And I think empathize is the key word there. And sometimes I find that can be hard sometimes, especially if you've never been in the position of the other person. But sometimes it just takes a little bit of imagination. So I like to imagine myself in that person's position. Is there a time when I've either been in that position, that's certainly the easiest, or something close to it, when I had to make a decision about somebody, or I had to decide whether or not to give somebody money, something that's at least bordering on close to that. So then you can really and truly empathize, instead of just saying, hey, this is why I want to work here, and here's my story, and here's this. It's really about that collaboration piece of it. So that's a great place to start. Know your audience, know what matters to them, empathize with them. Surprise, surprise, that's a marketing concept. So that's awesome.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think the next step to that, once we're empathizing, we're understanding, what is this person worried about? At that point, then that really narrows down all the stuff that you were going to say, because there's probably a lot that had nothing to do with what they're worried about. But then you can come in and position yourself as a solution to their problems. Yeah. Right? So then that's like, okay, you end up being someone that they welcome talking to because you've asserted what some of their problems might be. in addition to actually asking and just hearing them describe what their problems are. I think that's actually one of the biggest things that you can do in an interview, is not save the questions until the end. I think that's a huge mistake. And that's kind of a best practice, right? Where it's like, okay, well, at the end we have 5 minutes. So what questions do you have for me? And then you have a list prepared and you ask a couple questions. That's kind of the go-to way. But if you want to stand out, you have to do things differently, right? And I think one great way of doing that is flipping the script. And early on, I would say within the 20% mark of an interview, as early as you possibly can, to ask the hiring manager, what's keeping you up at night? What are the biggest challenges that you're seeing within your department, within the broader business? Where's this business trying to go in the next 3 years? What's the bottleneck that you're seeing that's preventing us from growing faster? What's the one thing that if it got taken off your plate would make your life way easier? I mean, these are all things that I'm sure the person would love to tell you about.
Yes.
Right? And so it just gives them a chance to tell you this, and then you can frame all of your answers at that point based on answering and addressing those things.
Right. And I love the flipping the script thing. And I think that sometimes that might be harder, especially if somebody just has like, okay, I'm going to ask you these 5 questions. And after I ask you these 5 questions, then you're going to ask your questions. But I think there's a way to do it, like if that's the case, where after you do your chit chat, after you establish a little bit of rapport, you get to know one another a little bit, really get to connect on a human level, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, something like that, depending on the length of the interview. But like you said, within the 20% mark, like if they just kind of dive into a question, like maybe it's well, tell me about a time when you had to overcome adversity at work. Mm-hmm. And so that could actually be a good opportunity to answer a question with a question, where you can say, oh, wow, that's a great question. Thank you. Really appreciate it. I'm thinking of a bunch of examples, but so that I can come up with the best example, how about you tell me, what's a challenge that you're facing right now in your job? And then you can sort of bring it back to, oh, okay, well, I experienced this kind of thing that was similar to that. And thank you for sharing that you're going through this right now. I think that I can help you guys get over this thing. So I love the flipping the script thing. I think that really is a way to stand out. But also it's the way that human communication usually happens anyway, isn't it? It's like, hey, can you help me? I'm not sure. What's wrong? Right? You want to know like what's wrong first.
Yeah,
it's just almost natural
definitely
that way. So
I think also I love what you were saying about establishing some rapport first. And I would say to even answer the first question or maybe even the second question and then bringing up, bouncing it back to the other person, because the interviewer is probably not expecting you to bounce it back right away. So they might actually still be getting in the groove of the interview. And let's say they just came out of a meeting. They're like, quickly trying to read through your resume and pretend like you're prepared. And so, you answering a little bit and giving some upfront shows that you're participating in this process, you're collaborating, you're playing your role. So that when you do ask the question, it becomes more, they're more likely to be receptive to that, I think, than asking that, right off the bat.
Absolutely. So there's like a flow, like a natural flow of conversation.
Yeah.
You're not automatically just going to say, well, Bob, you asked me this, but I'm going to ask you this thing.
Right, yeah.
Like establish a little bit of a back and forth first.
You can transition at, let's say you finish answering a question, and then before you end on a period, you then transition into asking that question. So let's say it's, tell me a little bit about yourself. You describe, whatever you wanted to say. And then at the end of it, you can say, and I'm super excited about bringing all that experience here to Acme Company, because it looks like you guys are, tackling problems like A, B, and C. Are those the kinds of things that you would say this team is focused on? Mm-hmm. Right? So it's like, okay, so then you show you've done your research too. You don't want to just pretend, or you don't want them to think that you didn't do any research and are just trying to get them to fill in the blank. So by saying, okay, here's some challenges that I see that I'm excited to work on. You show that you've done your research. You show that you have real reason for wanting to work at the company besides the brand on your resume. And that in itself makes you stand out from a lot of candidates, I'm sure. And then when you bounce it back, they can correct you, right? Like they have something to work off of. Because I think a lot of times when you ask someone something and they have to come up with an answer from scratch, it can be a little harder.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. And so a couple of points there. I love this. So asking powerful questions, one of the keys to asking powerful questions. So sometimes a powerful question can just be like a really like, why? You know, something very short and concise. Like those are kinds of things that I talk about like during one-on-ones with somebody who you already have rapport with, you know, that kind of thing. Short, not really embellishing a lot kinds of questions can be powerful. But in the context of an interview, I like the idea of throw something out there to show that you've done your homework. Because if you just come out and say, oh, and what kind of problems are you encountering, that may kind of take them aback a little bit or show them you haven't done the research, like, hey, what's going on here? But if it's like, hey, I appreciate that these are the kinds of challenges you might be going through right now, or I saw in your Twitter feed, or I saw this article that I read, or something like that, you know, or is this the reason that you wanted to hire someone like me? You know, are these the problems that you're facing? So that's awesome. That's like that's a marketing concept too, right? Asking powerful questions, because that's what engages people, and it shows them that, you know, you're really understanding what they're going through, but also want to help as well. And the other thing that I wanted to throw out there is that we've been talking about this within the context of job interviews, which is certainly a high stakes conversation. But all of this stuff that we're talking about in terms of establishing rapport, why does your audience, what really matters to your audience, what are their pain points, and then sort of positioning yourself as the solution to that problem, that applies to any kind of high stakes conversation, whether it's interviewing or promotion conversations or feedback or difficult conversations with the boss or anything like that. So it's really just, you know, at the end of the day, it's being human. It's like having a real empathic conversation with somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of this really does, the general concepts apply to negotiation conversations as well, for sure. I think, you know, you might have a whole script of what you want to say and a whole list of reasons why you deserve a promotion or why you're the best candidate. And, you know, I have a little bit of a contrarian view on this particular topic. So there's a lot of different views out there. So that's my caveat. My point of view on this is that I think most people have already decided before you walked into the meeting whether or not they want to give you the promotion or the raise. And so the process actually starts months beforehand, not, you know, when you set up the actual meeting. And so if you think about it that way, then you prepare for it differently, I think. And that's huge, right? Because if you're thinking that, okay, so this thing it's a multi-month long process, how do I break up you know, my strategy so that it's not one knockout punch, but it's a couple jab, you know, cross. It's, you know, that gives you a lot more levers to work with and a lot more chances to plant seeds and water, you know, those plants, so that when you do ask, that person is aware of the stuff that you've been doing. You know, they're not blindsided by this conversation. It's not a surprise. Like, oh, I had no idea that you know, you were interested in taking on more of a leadership role, or that you wanted to do different projects. And, you know, any surprise, I think, on the day that you actually talk to them, probably is going to work against you, because it's already such a stressful topic. And I think, you know, not necessarily going with the traditional idea of I'm going to come up with rational reasons and convince you of why you should give me a promotion. I think that's a huge one, right? So if we, you know, let's say we planned our timing right, we thought about it on a longer scale. The day of, the boss is in a great mood. We asked, you know, right when a project was going well. That's super important. But aside from those things, if you're relying just on rational data points of, you know, I'm going to prove to you why I deserve this, and objectively I'm the best candidate, you've already lost, because there's no objectively best for anything, right? It is best in the decision maker's eyes, and let's say that decision maker is your boss, so that person gets to decide what, you know, best looks like. And I think with us, if we're the ones trying to appeal to that person, it's really useful to just acknowledge that there is no objective best. So first, if it doesn't work, don't kick yourself too much and say, well, I'm a bad employee, I'm a bad engineer, and I'm a bad marketer. It just wasn't your day. Boss didn't really see it your way. It's fine. So I think that takes some of the pressure off. Sure. But also just realizing that so much of it is an emotional conversation. And the more that I think you can prime the pump so that the person has happy, good feelings about you, that has nothing to do with logically, I grew the company by X, or, I built Y and all the other people didn't. A lot of times that actually puts people in more of an analytical mindset. And then you start comparing and thinking, okay, fine. Well, maybe these other people didn't build the thing that you built, but they also sped up our operations by a ton. They also led, twice as many projects as you did, yada, yada. And you really just want to avoid this mental argument that the person might be having, where they're trying to refute the points that you're bringing up. Mm-hmm. So, my big thing there is, realize that it is an emotionally driven conversation, and try to avoid both parties getting into this really logical, analytical place, because that can work against you.
Yes. And I've experienced that. And I know I've had clients who have experienced that when they're on the job market. And so it's like, especially if you start talking numbers too early, if somebody pushes you like, what's the range? You're on like the first call, like, hey, yeah, maybe I'm interested in this position or not. Oh, just curious, what kind of range of salary are you looking for? You're like, hang on a second. I mean, that's the reason which I think it's good advice to not talk about numbers too soon, and to talk about what problems are you facing. Is this going to be a mutual fit? Because for exactly that reason, because it's an emotionally driven conversation, we don't want to talk about numbers too soon. We don't want to get into that analytic mindset. So I'm curious, Wes, when you talk about it being an emotionally driven conversation, I absolutely agree with that. So what does that mean? And I realize that right now, by asking this question, I'm going into an analytical mindset, which is a little bit ironic. But how can one prepare? How can we prepare to have that emotionally driven conversation and add that piece to it and be mindful of that?
That's a great question. It starts again with empathizing with the other person and all the stuff that they're currently thinking about and worried about and stressing out about. And also realizing that the day that you have the conversation, the minute that the person senses you're talking about comp, they're not necessarily waiting for you to say, here are all my bullet points. They're probably already thinking about, okay, what would be the process for me to push this through if I do agree that this person has been overperforming and doing a great job. Who do I need to loop in? What does our budget look like for the rest of the quarter next year? How soon can I make this happen? What is the likelihood that it could happen, so that I don't give too enthusiastic of a response and then disappoint the person? Do I want to go to bat for this person?
Yeah,
that's another thing. So I'm going to be the one that needs to get this budget from, my higher up, or shift things around. So do I want to go to bat on behalf of this person? And then also, are the other team members somehow going to find out? So let's say there's a title change. Is that going to cause weirdness among other people at the same level? Is that going to cause, more people thinking about hierarchy, and then a domino effect of other people saying, hey, well, actually, I'm more senior than this person. And you said that, we're all just going to stay at the same title. So, but now that this person's, had their title changed, should we all, or should I, right? So the minute that the person realizes this is a conversation about titles and comp, their mind is already running through 100 other things. And you can see that because if you've ever had a conversation about title, comp, career pathing, etc., sometimes you can see your boss's eyes kind of go far away. Like they're looking at you, but they're like looking through you almost. Yep. And usually you're like, okay, I'm going to assume this is okay and just keep talking because I have this whole plan of things I wanted to say. So I'm just going to keep going, stick with the script. but like they're somewhere else thinking about something else already. So I think that's just a huge thing to recognize and to plan accordingly for. So I actually think that, instead of having, 5 bullet points, 5 to 7, you have 3 maximum of the super key general areas of what you contributed, ready, and to otherwise, not go into too much detail about each of those projects or, each of those points and what you contributed, but mainly just saying like, okay, I did, these general areas, like, and it's your boss, like they already know what you've been doing. So limit the actual data points of why you deserve a raise, and keep your initial paragraph short. I actually am a fan of writing out a script because, there's a lot of ways to reduce anxiety, but I think one reason why we have anxiety about these things is we're not sure how it's going to go. We're not quite sure what we want to say. We're not sure what to say when that person says something and then we have to respond. So the more that you kind of map out, here are my general talking points, and then in more detail, here's what I want to say first, and then in closing. Yep. That's super useful because you can then just rely on, okay, I know what my first sentence is going to be. And then once you get going, you're going, like you're on a roll, right? So have your first sentence, have the ending sentence so that you can wrap up with a period and pause and be silent and let the person reflect. So having these anchor points is really, really useful. And then practicing that script with someone, whether it's your coach or your friend or a coworker, just getting used to saying certain words out loud is really useful because they'll call you out, and they should call you out. You should actually ask them to call you out if when you're saying certain phrases and sentences, it sounds like you're reading something. It usually does. Yeah. It usually does. So so practice it until it doesn't sound like you're reading anything, and practice it until you don't need the notes, because you're not going to have the notes the day of. At least I wouldn't recommend it. And keep practicing until it feels natural, and you don't have to say the words in the exact order of what you planned. It's the general idea. It's a general vibe, right? Like just get used to what vibe do I want to create, which is I want my boss to be pleased and happy with me, to have warm, positive feelings while we're having this conversation. And, the reason I'm mentioning a couple of my projects and wins is to remind them of the good stuff, the great stuff we've accomplished together, so that we're all basking in this glow of like, yes, wins, that's really the purpose. It's not to convince the other person. It's really to set up this mood of like, oh my God, you're right. Like, Jen, you and I have done a lot together, aggressive goals. And here we are a year later, having accomplished many of them. That's awesome. And it was fun, right? Like getting people to remember how fun it was working with you and how, right? Like all those positive feelings, you're just trying to induce this endorphin rush.
Yep. And then that in turn can make the conversation go so much smoother, especially if they already decided, okay, this person probably does deserve a raise and let's figure out how this is going to happen. But even if maybe that person maybe hasn't decided yet, or is like, oh, what's this about? It can just make the conversation go much better, because at the end of the day, you may not get the raise. You may not get the raise that you're asking for. Maybe you ask for 25%, you end up with 15. Maybe you ask for 10 and you get nothing. But at least still you put it out there, and you probably strengthen your relationship with that person in the process. So that's a really good reminder that it's not about convince, like argue, I deserve. It's more about, let's just go down memory lane together a little bit, because at the end of the day, if we're talking about a promotion situation, it is your boss. If it's an interview kind of a situation, it's more about getting people on board with you, and this is my story and this is my journey and you can probably relate to this. But again, it's like, what can be, both people are nervous. I mean, I think that's what a lot of people forget too, that even the great managers, the recruiters, this is not, even for people who do it every single day, who do sales and marketing and recruiting and hiring every single day, it still can be a stressful and anxiety-ridden experience. So whatever we can do together to sort of make that process a little bit better. I love that reminder and that frame of looking at it that way. That's how you deal with the emotional drivenness of the conversation is to make it more, to bring it back to the compassion. This is what we're doing together, and make it as much about the positive as you can as possible.
Exactly.
So now that we've covered a lot of the basics in terms of having these high stakes career related conversations and some of the basic marketing concepts that can be applied, how about we get a little bit more specific into things like fear of missing out or social proof or things like that? You know, other marketing terms or concepts that folks may have heard of, and they're like, oh yeah, that's a marketing thing, but I'm not really sure how I could use this in the context of these conversations. Can you think of any examples there?
Yes, definitely. We can start with social proof. You know, the way that social proof appears in an organizational brand setting is with testimonials, case studies, as seen in X publication, right? We had a waiting list of 10,000 people for this product, Kickstarter campaigns, you know, being overfunded. So if we translate that into an individual level for people, how does this really apply? And I think the way it applies is that there are shiny baubles, is what I call it. So shiny jewels that are kind of mental shortcuts for people. and the idea of these mental shortcuts is that, you know, we have positive halo effect associations with certain things, and you want to borrow those with these shiny baubles. So one great example of that is your university. That's a common one, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, I went to such and such school. You know, so university, previous companies you've worked for. So when someone's scanning your resume and they see, oh, well, this person was at Facebook and then Pinterest and then Google, they must be good enough for us, right? That's exactly social proof at play, because, you know, it's not that this HR person or hiring manager has delved super deeply into what you did at those companies. They're scanning your resume and these words popped out because they had previous associations with, hey, these are legit companies. And you're saying that you worked there. So it's almost this pre-vetting that's happening. And these mental shortcuts happen all the time. So one great way of using social proof when you're marketing yourself is to think about, what are these shiny baubles that I have that I can use in different situations. So we just covered school, we covered work. Others could be publications that you've written for. So if you're a guest contributor for Forbes, or you've written for Wired, those are all great to mention also. If you are a mentor for an interesting startup accelerator, if let's say you're a mentor for Y Combinator or WeWork, right? Like, these are all, again, names that other people recognize, and are great ways to show that you belong in this ecosystem, whatever ecosystem you want to try to break into. And so it's really about signaling and thinking about, okay, what are these other signals that I can really play up?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that these are great examples, and I think I'm just sort of imagining somebody hearing that and say, like, for some people, be like, oh yeah, I can come up with a whole bunch. You know, I can mention my university, places that I used to work. But I think for some people, it may be a little bit harder just because they're like, oh, well, you know, I didn't go to Harvard and I never worked for Google, and, you know, I'm not associated with any of those big name kinds of things. But whenever somebody says that, I always challenge them. I say, okay, remember, like, really, like, go, here's your homework assignment. Here's my challenge to you. Like, go home and write down like 5 to 10 things that you're really proud of in your career. And you will come up with something. It may not be as direct though. Like sometimes it's about, like, maybe you worked for somebody who worked for somebody, right? And it's like maybe your advisor or your mentor was somebody who is attached to like a big name thing, or at least something that somebody might connect with. So that I definitely suggest that. And also, what I'm curious about, Wes, is when we talk about these social baubles and these and I love that, you know, the jewels, and it's sort of like they're those mental shortcuts. They're these cognitive schemas that we use to sort of like find the signal in the noise of like, okay, you went to this school, so okay, you're probably pretty good at what you do, or you have this degree, so that can be another thing. Like maybe you have an MBA, or maybe you have a certification or something like that, that it's a way of saying, okay, this person has this level of training. What I'm also curious about as far as social proof, what about just like testimonials, or just essentially nice things that people have said about you? Maybe it's no one famous, maybe it's no one that anybody has maybe never heard of, but it's just something really nice, or something really great that somebody has said about you. Like, for example, what LinkedIn has the recommendations. Like that, I would say would fall under social proof as well.
Yes, that's a great example. LinkedIn recommendations, yeah, definitely. I would also say that the thing about tactics is that there's a bunch of tactics, and choosing which one to use for your unique situation, for the timing of where, and stage of wherever you're at, that's an art and science in and of itself. And so if a specific tactic doesn't, you feel like it doesn't apply to you as much, scrap it. It's fine. There's a billion more that you can really pick from. And so I would say that if you feel like there's not, a shiny bauble that really jumps out, the thing that I would think about is another tactic, framework that I call turning bugs into features. And I think your tribe would love this as technical people, because it's the idea that, there's this thing, and we thought it was a dark spot and not great, but we're turning it into something that is a positive. We're making it seem like this is an intentional choice. This is deliberate. This is something that I chose because of an overall broader strategy, based on, whatever you believe, your mission, values, choices, whatever. But it basically turns something that you're kind of embarrassed about, or feel like you have to gloss over, into a selling point. Yep. So I would say that, okay, this thing, we used to want to gloss over it, but what if you amplified that, took it out into the sunshine, right? It's in the sunshine, and then we amplified it by 10x, and we made it something that you actually hung your hat on, and I've seen such beautiful examples of this, because there are people who didn't go to, an Ivy League school. There's so many of us who didn't, right? But they've made amazing projects, right? They're building stuff. They're building side projects. They have a ton of different interests that they're constantly working on, projects that they're shipping. So, talk about those things, and frame it in a way where it's like, what? I don't really think credentials matter. Here's what matters instead. Look at my portfolio of side projects that I've launched one every single year, since whenever. And you can actually go and click around and like play around with this microsite that I built, or this art project that I did. And so then you shift the frame. You shift the frame from, okay, here's a frame on, hey, you had to have gone to Harvard to be, interesting, important. And we're taking this frame, we're moving it, and we're putting it here and saying, nope, not that. What actually is important is a candidate's ability to be scrappy, to build, to gather the resources they need to create something on their own and show their passion and interest for whatever field that they're in. And so when you shift this frame, you become the winner of that frame. Yay, like that's awesome. That's the holy grail, is when you become the winner of the new frame. And so I think that idea, fits really well into that social proof concept still, because it's the idea that, okay, all these projects are now your social proof. They're proof that you are a creator, you're a builder, you're resourceful, right? So that's social proof in a different way, but just equally strong for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you think about the stories that we're most inspired by are the ones where there was some adversity, there was some failure that happened, and maybe it was failure after failure, but that the way that the person is telling that story, they have reframed it into, actually, maybe at the time it really sucked and I was in tears and it hurt, but now looking back on it, that was actually the best thing that could have happened to me. Is kind of the way that I look at when I was an academic, and when I went up for promotion, I did end up getting promotion, but my department didn't recommend me. It was like a stake in the heart, like, oh, really? After 5 years of working my butt off, like, you're not going to recommend me? And there was like this anger, and there was this guilt, and there was like, what did I do wrong? And sort of turning it into, okay, what can I learn from this? All right, I probably didn't self-promote as much as I could have. I wasn't comfortable self-promoting at that point in my career. So it's, sort of turning those, and that's something for me that I didn't talk about a lot up until this point, because it hurts. It's like, oh my God, I'm a failure. Like my department didn't even see the value that I was adding, even though it was right there in front of them. But at the end of the day, it ended up being for a variety of different reasons. And I did see it as a learning opportunity. Mm-hmm. And it's one of the reasons why I ended up, kind of where I am today. And so I think that that's a great way to think about it, is turning those bugs that, like, okay, if there's something that you really, really don't want to put in your LinkedIn profile, or that you don't talk about when you think about your career arc, your career history, yeah, let's shine some light on it. Let's give it the light of day, and let's reframe it into something more positive as a way of overcoming adversity, because people love those kinds of stories. I don't know about other people, but I would much rather hire the person who shows a whole bunch of grit and tenacity and strength and went to some school that I never even heard of, versus somebody who went to Harvard or one of the big name schools and doesn't really show that they built that strength along the way and kind of feel a little bit entitled. Like, of course I'm going to hire the first person. So you can be either. You get to choose the story. And so that's a part of a lot of what marketing is, right? It's that storytelling and how you present yourself to the world. So those are great examples. We have time for one more example. If you want to think of one other marketing tactic or strategy besides social proof and turning bugs into features, those are really good ones. Any other ones that you think might be relevant to our conversation today as people think about how they might apply marketing to self-promotion at work?
Mm-hmm. The one that comes to mind is realizing that real life is a messy, squiggly line. Like if we think about life drawn out, it's like a crazy line. But stories tend to be this like really clean arc, and I think especially with people who are logical and rational and technical, it's really hard to draw that straighter line without feeling guilty that you're leaving out a ton of details that for the sake of accuracy you want to include and add caveats, and you don't want to ever say, I led that, because you also want to say, well, technically there were, I had 3 other people cross-functionally that were also leading, and right. And so you end up adding all these caveats, and it dilutes the strength of your story and the message. And so it's this delicate balance with being accurate and being truthful. Definitely don't lie. Like that's never ever a good idea. So be truthful, but know that any story involves prioritization. You cannot possibly tell your career history in 3 minutes, right? If you were to be super, super detailed. And so don't feel guilty about painting in just broad strokes, knowing that you can back things up. If someone asks, if they want more detail on a certain part of your history, they can always ask. And that when you're telling your story, whether it's an interview situation, whether it's negotiation with your existing team, you will have to simplify. So I think just acknowledging that life is this jumbled mess. I have to turn it into this line. What is the most important point that I want to get across, the most important story for this situation that would serve me well, helps remove a lot of that weight that you might be carrying about feeling compelled or obligated to go into too much detail too soon.
Yeah, broad strokes. You have to simplify when you're telling that story. And as you were explaining that, I thought of some times when I've done that, like you hedge it. You say, but I didn't really need it, but we didn't, but it took us this long to do it. We reached this outcome, but it took us 20 years or whatever it was. And I also was thinking of lots of times when I was talking with clients in a variety of different situations, like resume writing or LinkedIn profile writing is the time when it seems to pop up the most, where, it's like, okay, let's focus on what you did. Let's focus on what you delivered and the outcomes that you helped delivered. And so, like I remember talking to a client one time, and she basically led a project, and it resulted in some amazing outcomes. And that's what ended up on our LinkedIn profile. but it took some sort of, it was like this 10-minute, 15-minute story. And it was like, but this, but it wasn't really just me, and it took us this long, but this was after we failed so many times. Yeah, that's definitely a part of your story, but what you put on your LinkedIn profile, and this is still the truth, right? You led this project and you achieved some amazing outcomes. And I could tell that she was a little bit uncomfortable with it, but then over time I was like, yeah, you know what? That's right. That's absolutely correct.
Yeah. Half the battle is just convincing yourself.
It is, right. Exactly. We're so, I mean, especially for folks who are trained as engineers, as scientists, as data analysts and the like, we're so trained to like look at the caveats and the details and explaining, here's one reference, here's two references, here's three references, here's three reasons why I could be wrong. But that when we look at something like, no, it can't just be that simple. But sometimes it actually is, because that's what's going to get people to notice you and to contact you and to say, hey, this person could be the right person for the job, or this person deserves a raise, or this awesome project, or whatever it is. So it is almost unlearning some of the stuff that's been conditioned in our brains as wrong, that sometimes it's actually the right thing and the best thing.
Yes, exactly.
Awesome. Well, it's been great talking with you today, Wes. If people want to connect with you online or reach you online, what's the best way to find you?
You can find me on my website at weskao.com, and I write a blog about once or twice a week. And you can also follow me on LinkedIn because I post my blog posts there too.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you for spending some of your day today talking about marketing and career upgrading. It was definitely a really great conversation for me, and I know the folks who are watching are going to get some value out of it as well. So thanks again for a great conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jen.
Okay. Take care. Have a good day. Bye, everyone.
Bye.